folks. I'm John Oliver, Chair of the Rules Subcommittee. I am joined online tonight by the full committee. We have Councilors Krinsman, Humphrey, and Baker, and the esteemed Miss Catherine Holden from the clerk's office. We have three items in front of us tonight. I am trying to guide this process to a reasonable conclusion within the confines of this current term. Mr. Baker, I don't know if you want to just test your audio. We were having some challenges.
I have, unfortunately, the better camera is not working, so I have to use my laptop. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah, not only can we hear you, but we see you quite clearly.
All right. Right.
So again, we have three items to get through tonight or in front of us tonight. I am hoping that this is a relatively short session. Those items in order, and by the way, I should also mention we are being audio and video recorded because I don't think I mentioned that before. So the first thing I wanted to touch on was just discussing options for any open items. And currently, I'm tracking one and maybe a second item. And I do want to enlist folks' memories with me on this one. But I believe that this first item, which was brought forward by Councillor Albright regarding honoring long-serving councillors. And it's my recollection that we had determined that this was not so much a rule, but a best practice. Something that we wanted to document within the clerk's office because it wasn't really a rule per se. It wasn't at that same kind of, level, I guess, as a council rule. And I just wanted to look to folks to see if you could help me confirm or deny or change my recollection of that.
I think what you're saying makes sense. If you were to have some sort of restriction against something, then that would probably make sense to put in the rules. Like if you were to say somebody doesn't qualify unless X, Y, and Z or something, then maybe.
Right.
I do think something needs to, or probably ought to be done somewhere on this, just because I think the point that brought this up in the first place was that it wasn't consistently happening. Like it seemed to be just sort of randomly, like if someone happened to think, oh, I really liked that guy or that lady, and we should remember them now that they're dead. And then that wasn't even happening consistently.
Correct. Because it was to kind of set a standard, a measurement of consistency, in terms of, whether that particular alderman or councillor passed away, or upon their retirement, or upon achieving some monumental, significant number of years of service, which might include, the guy over here to your left, Mr. Humphrey. At least on my screen.
I should recuse myself from this conversation completely, but
and I kind of remember you saying that the last time we talked about it. So I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to look through the rest of not only my notes, but review the recordings of the previous sessions. But my strong recollection is that we had determined that this was not going to be a rule, but something we documented again for consistency's sake moving forward.
if I can make a suggestion independent of that specific item, we have in the council webpage some best practices. It strikes me that there might be a place for just good practices, not best, but good. And maybe this is one of those places,
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, it does seem to me like it would be considered a best practice to recognize our colleagues on notable occasions. All right. I'm going to do something that I didn't do last time, which was write that down. All right. The next item that we have that I'm tracking as still open was actually something that was brought up by Councillor Humphrey. I remember us discussing this. We talked about putting a time limit or a time restriction or forcing committees to take up items that are docketed within the term or within a certain amount of time, um, at least starting to discuss the item, if not voting it out. And I also recall that we had landed on a couple of potential concerns because committee agendas, for example, land use, they already have they have, is it 60 days that they're forced to respond within? Um, and then, on ZAP, I think we also talked about the fact that while we could start the item, there are many items that, require a significant amount of conversation. And by the way, that could be in any committee. I do seem to recall a couple that came up in programs and services that took more than 15 minutes to get through, namely our tree ordinance, and Councillor Baker's favorite, right? The leaf blower ordinance. Now, I'm listing it as still open because we did not come to a conclusion with how we wanted to approach that. So my question for this group is, do we want to try and tackle that yet this term? Or does that comprise our list of items that we tried to get through, but we did not finish?
I would definitely like us to deal with it this term.
Okay.
And I do think there's two pieces to it. First of all, besides those two pieces, I think you could specify that you're talking about docket items filed by counselors if you needed to avoid the issues around land use or stuff from the administration or whatever. A lot of that already has rules about how long it takes,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
something from a counselor. And that also avoids the issue of someone doing a sort of weird citizen filing that's not through the normal petition process, which also has its own rules.
Great.
Um,
So is
so
that the first
no, that's
part?
just setting the stage on like
Okay.
other alternatives here. But again, I think the two pieces which you've identified are getting the discussion started on the item and then also getting it out of committee. And I think those are probably handled in two different ways, um, and can be addressed by separate rules. So the thing is like, how do we make sure that something at least gets put on the agenda for a real discussion at least one time in a relatively reasonable span of time,
Hmm.
right? And then the other thing is you may have a situation where a committee is not representative of the overall council and has been dragging its heels, whether through endless discussions or no discussions. And most bodies, I think, have a process, especially ones of any large size, have a process for releasing something to the floor, some sort of discharge petition process or something. And I am of the opinion that if there was an actual reason not to advance something, you would not get majority support from counselors to do that. Right? They would still, if it was genuinely the case that you were like, this is not a fully baked item, we still need to work on it, there is still legitimate discussion to be had in committee, and this is a productive place to have it, I think that most people would say, yeah, that makes sense to me. And we see that a lot of times when we have those discussions about committee work happening in committee when we're at the full council, right? That being said, I think you do need to have that safety valve there that's pressure on the chair to actually have a real discussion. And by having the possibility that it can get taken away from the committee, I think that forces a meaningful discussion. And I think also it raises the possibility to the committee members that they need to think about trying to come up with something that is representative of the entire council's opinion, not just their own opinion, right? Because you can have a scenario where 5 or 6 counselors in a committee have a factional opinion that is in no way representative of the majority opinion. And I think the only thing that's going to get them in some cases to actually come up with something the full council wants is by having the possibility that it may end up getting to the floor and getting amended on the floor instead.
Mhm.
I guess the question is whether we continue to take this up. I'm not in favor of it, but just see where others on the committee are. I know Councilor Humphrey is, but I think that the council has operated reasonably successfully without it, and I just see the opportunity for the floor, the board being taken up with discharge petitions and a whole lot of just I know from experience now after almost a whole term working just on ZAP items, we're trying very hard to make sure everything gets discussed and even moving things around in order to accelerate some things. But I feel awkward about trying to do something just because there's a potential discharge process. And now I realize other bodies may do it, but this is a rule change I don't favor. So that's just, for purposes of where we go with our time.
Okay. Councilor Crispin?
Yeah, I'm really torn on this one because I understand the point that Councilor Humphrey is making. And in many respects, I agree with it, right? Which is that you want an opportunity for basically what is needed from the council. If you know, for example, or if you believe, for example, that there are 16 councilors who favor some petition, but you just don't have 5 of them on the committee of jurisdiction to have that situation just because of the composition of the committees, and you guys know how I feel about the committee structure, to have that act as sort of a gate, right? Not letting the petition come through. But I also see what Councilor Baker's saying, and I see the potential for essentially having the agenda of a committee taken over by a rambunctious counselor or counselors who just file petition after petition after petition to make sure they get heard, to make sure they take up all the time. And I think the gatekeeping mechanism to keep this sort of committees running and functioning has been the president selecting committee chairs who will, keep the trains running on time, so to speak. And you have, I think, committee chairs who work with their committees to say, what are our priorities? What are the things we want to take up? And again, sort of keep the trains running on time. So I'm torn. I guess, I'm feeling at the moment like it's probably not ready for prime time, and I would lean more, I think, towards Councilor Baker's side, but I see what's going here. So I'm happy to invest the time if folks want to.
Well, I just don't, I don't understand how it could possibly be considered democratic that you have the chairs are appointed by the council president, uh, basically as like political patronage, and then never get removed from that position during that term, and then have unilateral control over their own committees in terms of what's on the agenda, and what gets taken up and when it gets heard and when it actually gets out to the full council. And I do think this is a point of frustration for the public, which we're also supposed to be factoring in here. That I don't know, maybe nobody ever brings it to you, maybe they only bring it to me, but it is very common for members of the public to come to me and say, I don't understand why this item is not getting dealt with in committee. And the answer that I have to give is the chairs of the committee have completely unchecked ability to set the agenda for their committee. There is no balancing mechanism of any kind on that, other than, I guess, peer pressure theoretically, and even then, I don't think that's real.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if any member of the council who has an item before me and zoning and planning is welcome to call me up and say, I'd like to have this discussed. I mean, I think there are plenty of informal mechanisms available. And maybe I'm just, I think the ability to set the agenda and try and manage the traffic, so to speak. Maybe I'm just because I've been involved with ZAP and we see so much stuff, and Councilor Oliver and I both meet with the planning department before each council, I mean, each ZAP meeting, just to try and organize what's going to happen and when. And that's a process where there are a lot of moving parts, and I guess I would rather not have my discretion subject to review in this process. So,
Well, yes,
but
I
I've said
think
that. I don't
tell.
mean to. I mean, I'm speaking in an institutional sense, not me personally. I mean,
Well,
Yeah.
but in a sense, you are speaking personally. You don't want your discretion to be, constrained or curtailed in any way. And the point that I'm making, when I think about what we're doing as a big picture thing about setting rules, putting them in writing, is I do not care about the individual specific people that hold different roles. The part that I care about is what if it's not you making that decision, right? What if it's somebody else making that decision? What are the rules and precedents that we're setting for no matter who is occupying those positions? And if
I
somebody
understand
calls
that
you
it's just,
up and
yeah.
says, I would like to get my agenda item heard, that's great that you're willing to put it on the agenda. Some chairs are not. And it's not always going to be you that's making the decision for a particular committee. So that is not relevant to my consideration here.
I understand that. I'm just saying that it's not so much. I think my experience informs my sense of what is a good practice, and so that's still where I come down. That's all. But
And if I may, just a couple of thoughts here, like, because I'm kind of, I agree with Counselor Humphrey. Well, actually, all three of you have said things that I agree with. I believe that we should deal with this, like, and not dealing with it is kind of, ironic in the sense that, well, hey, maybe we're not going to get to this term. But I do wonder, like, I go right to the practicality of dispensing with this properly in the time that we have in front of us. Because one of the things that did come up last time we talked about this is, for example, in ZAP, we've had a couple of instances where we literally could not get to an item in a what I'm going to call a timely fashion because we had the planning department running at max speed. Like they literally said, okay, we're full, timeout. We got to dispense with something before we can bring something else in. I don't know if that is ever the case with other departments, but I would suspect that it could be. Um, so I look to challenges like that, especially at the end of this term, with the end of the, we have one mayor exiting the office, another coming in, and I'm not trying to say, Councilor Humphrey, that we wouldn't or shouldn't do it this term, but I do think that there are some practical considerations we need to take into account, because this is going to have to go to the administration to say, well, all right, what's the right time frame within which the city council should consider saying, thou shalt hear it within, and I'm going to make it up, 90 days or within 6 months or whatever. I just don't know if we're going to be able to do this item justice in the 60-ish days we have left in front of us this term. I'm happy to give it a shot, frankly. But
Well,
we're only going to have, as a subcommittee, one, maybe two meetings left before we have to say, okay, great, we have to stop, go pencils down, give all of our content and all of our changes to, I'm going to loosely call it the administration, whether that's HR, legal, and or somebody like the COO, to just review and make sure we haven't stepped on ourselves or other practices unwittingly. And then we've got to bring the package to programs and services for full vote, and then we've got to get it to the full council as well. And I've been asked to do that by early-ish in December, just in case someone should decide to charter the item, meaning the changes.
okay. So
Anyway.
I'll make some specific proposals
Yeah, all right.
because that will at least give us something to think about. So on the discussion side, I think it
Just
would be
starting the item.
reasonable. Yeah, I think it would be reasonable to say that an item filed by a city councilor that does not have other deadlines attached to it shall be heard for at least one substantive discussion in committee within 90 days unless the lead sponsor agrees to extend that, which I think most reasonable counselors would agree to an extension if it was legitimately an issue of we can't get this on the schedule or we can't get staff time, right? So 90 days with basically that the lead sponsor is consulted on extending that if they are willing to do that. If they're
Okay.
not, then that's again, forces it to be considered. And then on the other side, I think that you could say that if an item has not received a vote in committee within 6 months of being filed, not from being heard, from being filed, that a majority of the elected city councilors can sign a letter requesting it be released to the full council for consideration. And that's not to say that they have to do that, but they are allowed to do that at that point. And I think that would, again, I think both of these create some pressure to make sure that things are in fact being considered and debated, and that's being done in a legitimate fashion. And I think that most people would be reasonable about it if they felt that there was a good faith effort being made to deal with these items. If not, then yeah, they're gonna say, no, I want this to get, force a hearing on it, and I want it to get, taken to the full council or whatever. And I understand the practicalities here, and I understand the not wanting to get overwhelmed on schedule or wanting to have discretion or whatever, but at certain points, there's going to come a time when there's some, really hot button stuff that somebody wants to bury, and they're just going to leave it sitting for 2 years and then expire at the end. And that's not a democratic process. And I mean, this is the local level of government. We need to have at least bare minimum compliance with sort of people's basic expectations of a democratic process. And not to get too philosophical about it, but I think the thing that has been on my mind in recent months is that I think that having government systems that are not responsive on a basic level, like not even willing to consider stuff even if it doesn't pass, leads to a lot of sort of instability and violence out in the society, because people get so frustrated, that they start reacting unpredictably. And I think we should be setting a good example at the local level and saying you can get something on the agenda, you can get it heard, you can get it voted on. You may not get your way, and that's okay. That's part of the process too. But it shouldn't be down to one random out of 24 counselor who gets to set the agenda.
So if I may, I just want to make sure I'm playing this back correctly. What I'm hearing is for any item docketed by one or more counselors that don't have other, required deadlines, like something that goes to land use or something that's got a, something that has to be heard in some other, time
Right.
frame.
Appointments, yeah.
You're suggesting that the first discussion of said item has to happen within the first 90 days, unless the lead sponsor counselor agrees that, hey, I understand, okay, you're jammed up with these other 3 things, you can push beyond 60 days. So far, do I have it right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Or
far
I said 90 days. Yeah.
I'm sorry, 90 days if I said 60. I'm looking at 90. I wrote it right, said it wrong. Now, to get it out of committee, in other words, voted on, you're suggesting 6 months from the date of filing.
Or I guess it would be the date that it was accepted to the docket.
Well, fair enough. Right, that it showed up as a, it made it through the docketing system.
Yeah.
And from there, the opportunity for a majority of the council or the committee?
It's a majority of the full council, the elected
Majority of the full council
councilors.
could
And you'd
force
have to
it to be
specify
released.
that there are the elected councilors so that if you had a vacancy or something, that wouldn't affect it. Like, I think I mean, yeah. Or you could
Okay.
specify a number if you wanted to. You could say like it needs to have 13 councilors or something like that.
Sure. And then, so then it would be released to the full council if it hadn't been voted out.
Yeah, I think it would, I mean, in the same way that the council can do whatever it wants with a committee's report once it gets to the full council, right? So it's essentially like there was no report made or it's no action necessary or whatever, but like someone can then say, I would like to substitute a yes vote on this. And also I would like to offer X, Y, and Z amendments if they thought there were changes that needed to be made. And anybody could offer amendments, right? You could have hostile amendments or what have you, right? But I understand most people would be like, I think this is probably not the way to handle this, right? Because it is a little bit chaotic. But again, I think having the threat there means that people have to take it seriously and make a good faith effort to deal with it.
So
Okay.
I appreciate the points. I'm not persuaded. I just think it's going to create more mischief than it creates benefit. The other problem is that there are items in committee that I just know from my experience, and I suspect Councilor Krinsman and Councilor Oliver have seen them in their context as well, that come up that do require and are, from the administration or that require statutory deadlines to be met. So counselor items are almost by definition rarely emergency situations. They're policies and good ideas and things like that. But they, if you're trying to manage the whole agenda, I just think this creates an opportunity for that I haven't seen a need for, and I just guess but I'm just one vote. So I appreciate Councilor Humphreys' attempt to try and codify something, and I appreciate also his point of view that it ought to be independent of the players. I just am not persuaded it's a good change. So.
And Councilor Wright, and by the way, we have been joined by Councilor Wright, not a member of the subcommittee, but always welcome. I don't know if you have any comments here, but I was going to see if Councilor Krinsman, you had any reactions to add.
Yeah, again, I hate to sort of toe the fence here. I think the way Councilor Humphrey has proposed it is the way it would make sense if we were to do it. I think those are the right parameters. That's a reasonable timeline. I think if we're going to do it, I think that's the way to do it. I think it's a majority of the elected councilors that are discharging an item from a committee that has been obfuscatory, I think I share Councilor Baker's hesitancy. What I will say is that we as a council have resisted doing too much business as a full council, always in favor of doing the work in committee. This move would be a move a little bit further on that spectrum towards doing work in the full council. I don't say that as a positive or a negative, okay? Because there are plenty of times where I have said, we're a council, let us debate it. Let's do the work as a council. There are times where I have said, yep, it does make sense. This is really a committee discussion. Like we should do that in committee, but I don't have the general fear of doing work in a full council that some of my colleagues share. So just pointing out that this is moving us on that spectrum to throw that into the discussion. It doesn't, tip the table for me one way or the other. So the lights are out here on me. So
I would also just suggest that this proposal is not as arcane as some of the rules discussions that we've had before. I think it will be more easily understood by the counselors in general. I would really like us to take this to a larger setting, ironically or not ironically, I don't know.
Appropriately.
Right?
Appropriately.
Because appropriately, perhaps, because I think that this is the type of thing that I would like more counselors to have an opportunity to weigh in on. The fact that there's 4 of us here and also one other counselor, right? And that's who's even party to this discussion. Like even just having it on a programs and services discussion would get more people.
Well, all of
Well,
this,
by definition, 3 to 4 more, yes.
well, just to be clear on process, I thought the subcommittee reported to programs and services, and then this programs and services reported to the council on this
Yes,
process anyway.
my
That's
suggestion
correct.
is that I don't want this group of 4 to kill this proposal without having it duly discussed by a larger group.
Well, I mean, it's certainly possible it just depends on how you all vote. I mean, I'm not going to support it, but that just means that you've got one vote in yourself and 2 other people to persuade to put it on the programs and services discussion list. You know, and if it's as far as, but that's
Yes,
just
it's
where I
possible that my remarks were not directed at appealing to you on that point.
And so from my perspective, I don't know if this has been done before or not, but I would be willing to try this. I would certainly be willing to take it forward to programs and services and highlight it as a what's the right way to kind of couch it is, effectively put it on second call with programs and services as a, hey, we wanted to get more voices involved with this, so I'm gonna hang on to this one a little bit differently than the rest of the items, because I do wonder, like when we talk about a change in process like this one, I wonder what other behaviors we might get. For example, might something like this be a signal to counselors to, hey, you know what? I don't want to hang committee X out to dry because I know they're really busy, so I'm going to think twice about docketing these 3 items. Or might it work the other way around? I don't know. But I whether or not we treat it as a pilot for a term, I don't know. But I'd be willing to consider that because I do respect where Councilor Baker is coming from. I also respect, because let's face it, there were multiple items hung up in previous committees because the chair didn't want to take them up. Period. Didn't want to take them up. So I understand where Councilor Humphrey is coming from. And a mechanism by which, if nothing else, I like the idea of having a mechanism by, wherein the docketers of said item can force the item to be heard within a certain time frame. That I completely respect. I think that, again, the outcome, may or may not be favorable, but I do appreciate the, hey, this item's been sitting there languishing, for example, on your docket for 5-6 months, whatever, and I see no move to take it up. So as the lead docketer, or maybe we go to back to the full council and say you need a majority of people to kind of force the item. I like that part of it. I really do.
As I said, I think there's 2 separate things here, and these can be considered independently as well, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think procedurally, I would put them separately because the times might be different and the number of counselors needed to discharge might be different. But, those are policy discussions that we can elaborate in the Programs and Services Committee.
Okay.
I just, if the will of the subcommittee is to take it forward, certainly you should do that. I'm not going to support it and I'll argue against it, but that doesn't mean I should prevail.
Sure.
I would like to prevail, but that doesn't mean I should.
Fair enough. All right. Well spoken.
Let me say this. If Councilors Humphrey and Oliver support it and Baker opposes it, I will abstain so that it moves forward to the full Programs and Services Committee.
All right.
How's that for a resolution?
I think that's an acceptable proposal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm comfortable with that. And what I'll do from here, Counselor Humphrey, like, do you want to write that up, or do you trust what I wrote down and reiterated makes enough sense for me to take a stab at it, just so that we get it correctly when we bring it to the full
Yeah.
committee?
I trust you. You read it back to us, and despite
Okay.
saying the wrong thing, you had it written correctly.
We'll have an
Well,
opportunity in discussion.
I'll transfer the notes, not,
Yeah.
my verbal.
And then Councilor
yeah.
Crispin can just not vote, and that still produces the same outcome. Never mind.
Exactly. Okay, so those are the only two items that I'm carrying that I didn't have a finite do it or don't do it, like an NAN or it's in the red lines. Did anybody else have anything else that they had in the back of their mind, in front of their mind, that we have not closed out? And this, we still have time to, like, if you think of something in the next 3 days and go, oh, we didn't finish this other item, we can still take care of it. But I just want to put that question out there, because everything else on my list of, I was carrying 17 items, including the two we just discussed. And we have now kind of discussed them all. We have a plan of action.
Very productive of us.
Isn't it just, though? All right, so I think then, looking down this list that I had created for our agenda, the next item was to just kind of, I can take us through, or Katie, do you want me to show? Or do you want to share the red line?
Share it, sure.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I can share it.
Okay. So literally, I think it might just make sense to, like, this will be, I think what we need to do with this is we're going to have to take this and share it with law, with HR. But I wanted us to be able to look at it and just kind of really quickly step through this. Because we will, as a subcommittee, we're going to see this one more time, at least, before we bring it to programs and services, which we're going to have to treat what we just discussed as kind of a sidebar, hold it out as a red line when we bring it forward, or a separate red line when we share it with law and HR, just to make sure that, and I'm sorry.
What is the item? Just so I understand.
Hang on. Sorry. One other thing that is open, Counselor Humphrey, you and I both didn't mention this.
Oops.
Yeah, what? Oops is right. So we have a draft version of a code of conduct that Counselor Humphrey and I kind of knocked together, given the presentation that we received from
Our
I forget the
intern.
woman's name. Yep, thank you. A ways back, I think it was in May, to have them review it to make sure that we're not overstepping or saying, just saying anything crazy that we can't do. We expect to have that review completed within the next, I'm going to say, like 10 days. And from there, that would be like an attachment to, at least I'm thinking it would be an attachment to the rules as either, an addendum or an appendix item, something like that. So I was incorrect. There were 3 items that are kind of in the works now, including the code of conduct. And now
I'm sorry, just to clarify, the code of conduct will come back to the rules committee to discuss, right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, with the law department and HR are reviewing it from their perspective, just to make sure there wasn't some obvious problem with it. And then they have a pretty tight turnaround to get back to us with notes on that.
It's fine. I just want to make sure that we have a chance to look at it and talk it over.
Correct. That's why, yes, that we're kind of parallel pathing a few things right now.
That's all right. I just want to understand where we were. Okay.
Appreciate that. All right, so then Katie, if you will, if you could kind of, I would like us to obviously see what we've done here with the rough draft. I don't think, reading it, I don't think we're gonna go through it in the speed with which we will be able to read it all. We'll have to share this.
Well, I wonder, if, Mr. Chairman, if it would make sense to get us a red line that, because I have trouble reading things on the screen generally, and so I always have them printed out. Is it possible to have this printed and we get a chance to look at it before the next meeting?
Yes, I think that's totally reasonable and fair. And one thing I just noticed, Katie, page 1, we should change the seal. Or the cover page, whatever
I
page
wrote
number.
it down too.
Okay, all right. So I'll just kind of call these out as we're scrolling through this, but there were a lot of edits made to the table of contents just to kind of, it was a little bit out of order in the old version. So we've kind of streamlined it a little bit, put it back into a better semblance of order here. As you can see, there's, obviously we've called out the areas that are net new because we have brought in, sorry, I have a list of these things that we've taken care of. So the edits were the formatting, changing dates, restructuring table of contents, and a lot of wordsmithing. We have consolidated into one document the procedures for real property reuse that will include kind of that flow chart or decision tree that we use. The rules subcommittee, because oddly enough, it wasn't in our rules at all. It is now. As well as the finance audit committee or subcommittee, because that was a separate document. Now it's being brought in or folded into the rules. We have made modifications here, or we will have made modifications to include the presentation of files, right, to the list of things that have to be submitted ahead of committee meetings. We had approved that. The minor edits to the responsibilities for the PS&T committee. We have added the ability or a comment to allow for the president of the city council to adjust the meeting time of full city council meetings when there's a significant or large presentation, from the city, like the mayoral address and things of that nature. Also, there was a minor edit to the election, the process for electing a city council president, where we noted that there is no reason under our rules that I believe it would be the president emeritus who would be running this, to allow for a recess between iterative rounds of voting. We will, assuming that we accept it, the code of conduct has yet to be added. And then obviously the item we just talked about regarding the timeframes for addressing docketed items by city councilors. So those are the changes that we have made or will be making here. And as Councilor Baker noted, we'll get a red line or this file sent out so that you have a chance to obviously comb through it in detail. And I wonder, I would assume that normal practice for that would be to include 2 files, the red line version and a clean version.
Sure, and Katie didn't mind just making sure I get a hard copy of both, that's all. Because again, sending it to me gives it to me on the screen, which is not optimal, but that's just my preference. I have a question of just on the, going backwards on your agenda and your list when you get done.
Yeah, go right ahead.
The code of conduct, I don't know if we've talked about where it lodges. And again, it depends on what it says and how it says it. But as I mentioned earlier, we have best practices. We also have appended to the rules. There was that whole thing about the financial practices of the city that we added as a supplement, but it doesn't have the status of a rule. I think one of the issues that, depending on how we all feel about the code of conduct, is what is its, how does it operate? Is it a rule of the council? Is it best practice? I will say that when we did the best practices for land use involving, the idea of whether how councilors, when dealing with special permits, should respond to requests for their views on matters, that the Weedy Young, who was then the associate city solicitor, said, please don't put that in a rule. I don't want to have someone overturning a council decision because somebody makes a mistake in a sense of practice. Make it a good practice, and we'll try and make it that way. So I just want to mention that because there may be, as part of your legal review with the law department, some question of how this operates. Even if we get one, does it have the force of a rule? Is it a best practice like the land use process? Practices, where does it end up? And I'm not prejudging that. I'm just asking that question be on the table when we talk about it.
Good question. I had assumed it would be treated as a rule, but maybe that was a bad assumption.
Well, I just don't recall we have discussed how it's shaped, but
I
that's,
think you're right.
yeah, but anyway, I just want to mention that because I do recall we had a real, it wasn't a very public discussion because it involved the city solicitor really giving advice at the time. But I remember when we did the whole best practices for land use procedures, that was the advice from then associate city solicitor Weedy Young, who I respect immensely, and said, don't make it a rule, make it a practice. I said, okay.
All right. I think we can take that under advisement and bring that up for conversation when we have comments back from HR and law.
Sure.
Legal. All right. Moving on to the last item that I was hoping we could just I just want to say this out loud to this committee, and as well as Councilor Krinsman, because he runs the he's in charge of the agenda for programs and services. Near as I'm currently tracking 5 steps that have to happen between now and the end of the term. We have to, we as a group, as a rules subcommittee, need to have at least one more meeting to review not only code of conduct, but the timing for dealing with docketed items, as well as just to kind of make sure that everything we have and are taking forward to programs and services is clean from our perspective. I think we should be able to get that done somewhere in the mid-October timeframe. At least I hope to. Then if there are any further edits, we have to make those on the spot and get the entire package of rules edits probably back to legal, as per, including what Councilor Baker just said in terms of, do we want to treat any code of conduct that we recommend, do we treat it as a rule or as a best practice? I'm hoping that's either mid to late October that process begins, because by the end of October, I'd like to have the rules subcommittee to finalize all of our recommendations and present them as a package to programs and services. So I'm thinking end of October, maybe that first few days, our first meeting in November, something like that, so that we can still have one round of revisions as needed, and then be able to get to the full council review either, just before Thanksgiving or just after, so that we still have room in case someone charters the thing.
Yeah, and that aligns, for what it's worth, that aligns with, I know we had a conversation maybe a month and a half ago, something like that. What does the calendar look like? What does the schedule look like to make sure we get this done? And to Councilor Baker's earlier point, I, being the reasonable chair that I am, heard the voice of a reasonable colleague asking me to put something on the agenda, and I said, absolutely, I'd be more than happy to do that.
All but not a rule.
Look at the reasonableness going around.
I would ask the question of rule versus practice to the law department before we take it up rather than after, because I think it may shape their response. And
Yep, no, I think that's totally fair. I think that's something that Councilor Humphrey and I can kind of get their way. And I say Councilor Humphrey because he wrote he was the owner of the file that went over to not only law, but the HR department as well.
Sure, yeah.
So we'll make sure that that's taken care of. And with that said, that's all I had for us this evening.
well, that's ambitious, and thank you for carrying us along.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I made a commitment to Councilor Krinsman that I would do my darndest to get us moving along here. So hopefully
appreciate
that
it.
fits the bill.
Hugs Sameach, everyone.
Have a lovely night. And Ms. Holden, is that clear as mud? You're tracking with all the stuff that you got to keep me honest too. All right, fantastic. And with that said, I think we are adjourned, folks.
Thank you, guys.
Sorry,
can you
Councilor
stay on
Baker?
with Ms. Holden, Mr. Chair, and me and you just for a minute so that we can just clarify something with ZAP. It's not a matter. Just want to make sure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.